Hi and welcome to section 2, in which we are going to look at scalability of the architecture. So now in this section we are going to look at aspects which are available in AWS for scaling your architecture. So in this video we are first going to understand what is the need for scaling in the first place. So first let's understand a simple architecture. So let's say you have a web application hosted on an EC2 instance. So this is being accessed by your user community. Now let's say your web application has become quite famous and a lot of users are now starting to hit your application. What happens to the performance of your underlying EC2 instance? Can it handle the load because of the increased number of users? It could be the case that your web application could go down because of the increased number of users. So sometimes a single EC2 instance hosting an application may not be able to sustain high loads. Now, one solution to this is that you can increase the underlying capacity of the instance. So let's say you spun up an instance which has 2 CPU and let's say 4 GB of memory. You then see that the instance is becoming a bottleneck in terms of performance. In AWS, you can increase the instance type. So maybe you beef it up to, let's say, 8 CPU and 16 GB of RAM. You can do this, but then really to what extent can you keep on increasing the capacity of your underlying instance? At some point in time, this will also start becoming a bottleneck for your application. So your architecture basically needs to scale. So what do I mean by a scalable architecture? So let's look back at previous diagram. So we had our EC2 instance hosting web application. Now if you add an increased number of users, instead of directing all of the users onto that single EC2 instance, what you can do is that you can spin up another EC2 instance which is also hosting your web application and then distribute traffic to these underlying EC2 instances. So over here, you are scaling your architecture by increasing the number of servers. So this is a concept of a service known as autoscaling. So autoscaling is a service available in AWS which is used for scaling your architecture. In autoscaling, you first have to define a launch configuration. So that launch configuration basically has details of what should be the underlying type of instance that you need to be launched as part of the autoscaling group. For example, what should be the underlying OS for the instance? What should be the instance type? All of these details are specified in the launch configuration. You then need to define scaling policies. So some of them are, you could do it based on a schedule. So you could say every day in the morning, increase or scale the number of instances in your autoscaling group. You could also add a dynamic scaling policy. So in the dynamic scaling policy, you could say that increase the number of servers in our group based on a particular threshold. So let's say if the CPU utilization of your underlying servers is going beyond a particular threshold, then go ahead and add new servers to the autoscaling group. Now again, just to go back to an example of these different types of scaling policies. So let's go back to the schedule. It's important to understand when you would use which type of scenario. Let's say you have an application that is being used in your organization very heavily early in the morning. For example, let's say you have your support team that uses an IT support system in your company. Now, as soon as they log in to their systems in the morning, that is when the system would get the highest number of hits, because all of your employees in the morning are logging on to the system and seeing all the important calls which they need to attend. So during the early part of the morning, you can always expect a high amount of traffic on that application. So what you can do is that if you're placing your application as part of an auto scaling group, you can ensure that the group scales to a desired capacity early in the morning so that the application doesn't have any performance issues. Later on in the day, when the load comes down, you can add another policy to decrease the number of instances in that auto-scaling group. You also have the dynamic scaling policy. So in the dynamic scaling policy, I said you can scale based on certain metrics. So I said, if you feel that you need to scale based on the CPU utilization of your underlying resources, you can do so. Now, an important aspect is that you can do both a scale out and a scale in. So a scale out is basically increasing your capacity based on demand. But obviously, once your application is settled down and you don't get that much of a demand, because the demand is spiky. It can go up at times, it can come down at times. So when the demand comes down, you should not be having those underlying instances already spun up, because then you are enduring a cost. So let's say if you had one instance as part of your application, it scaled up to, let's say, 3 based on the demand. But let's say the demand has now gone down. If you still have 3 virtual servers running at all times, you would be enduring the cost for all 3 virtual servers. So in order to ensure that you also keep a check on the cost, auto-scaling also has this facility to scale in. That means decrease the number of instances in that group if the demand goes down. This is also very important. You have to implement this as part of your auto-scaling group. So we've looked a lot at what is scaling, what is auto-scaling. We have to see a demo on this in the next video.